Thanks everybody for joining today. Wanted to spend some time talking about cognitive bias in software development. Nothing in particular has triggered this topic other than my general interest in it. Just going to start by talking a little bit about what is cognitive bias anyway. We all kind of fall for these. You do not simply not fall for them, as the meme there says. So I thought we'd kind of look at that, and then there are a few I picked out that are, I think, of particular interest to what we do in the scope of software development and providing products that customers love. And then I want to hopefully going out of today's meeting, give you at least a couple resources that you might find interesting to go explore even more cognitive biases out there, just for the sake of your own personal edification or personal growth and mastery. So, excuse me, what is a cognitive bias? It's the textbook definition here: systematic pattern of deviation from norm or rationality in judgment. So basically, we're deviating from what's rational. And like I said before, we've really all either exhibited a cognitive bias, or we've experienced somebody else exhibiting one on us, if you will. And it's important to note, I think, that I'm not making any moral claims about whether these biases are good or if they're bad, if they're right or they're wrong. We all do them, right? And I think what's important and what we should walk away with is that our awareness is what can help us determine, whether a bias is benefiting us in a decision or not. Because, through generations of, just being in a society, right, we form these biases. They get handed down through generations. And so some of them are really good, and some of them probably aren't. But again, I just use that word, they're really good, but I don't want to make any moral statements about them. So they're here. The more we know about them, the better we can handle them and act on them as needed. I'm going to show a list of biases in a minute, and you're going to see a bunch of them are logical fallacies, which kind of fall under cognitive bias. One could argue that those are bad. I mean, you could also argue that they're not, because sometimes we do things that are illogical that have good results. So that said, I do want to show real quick, if I can manage to change what my screen is sharing here. There's an evolving list of biases, right? So over the past probably 6 decades or so, the study on this has really grown. And so it's always evolving. The list is always changing. So there are 2 particular things I want to show. One here is this site called Your Bias Is, which hopefully you're seeing now, maybe. This is a great site, just has some overviews of some biases with some cute little icons and stuff, but there's overviews of what they are. It's a good resource just to kind of check out. The whole site, there's a companion site, I think it's yourlogicalfallacy.is, also has a list of different logical fallacies, all sorts of stuff here. I highly recommend checking out this site. The other one is the Cognitive Bias Codex, and this is really what kind of got me thinking about this topic. This is like one of my favorite like user interface designs for data that I've come across recently. So this basically takes the list of cognitive biases and breaks them down into different categories. So biases around what should we remember, the need to act fast, not enough meaning, too much info. And then you can actually click on every single one of these, right? And then they're broken down into more, excuse me, lower level groups here. So how do we act when we notice something has changed? Well, there's all these different ones here. So you can actually click on all of these and they will bring you to a different Wikipedia site. And if it's on Wikipedia, it must be true. So you can trust everything on here. But this has been a really cool place for me to just go and, if every week I want to check out a new bias or something, good place to go and check that out. So just wanted to share that with you real quick. There are links to both of these in the presentation. I don't know if we send those out or not, but I can drop them in the chat here after the fact. So that said, moving along. So those are some great resources, but again, walking out of here, hopefully those are a resource for you to check out more. So we're going to cover 3 today that I think are fairly common. Probably you'll all be nodding your heads. Oh yeah, I've seen that one. So we're going to start with maybe the biggest, and that's the sunk cost fallacy. And basically what this says, what this is using a sunk cost as a justification for further spending. So a sunk cost really is just something that has been incurred and can't be recovered. And these take different forms, right? It's not just money. So most of the time we think about this in terms of, oh, we've already spent, $2 million on this project. We may as well finish it because we have so much invested. Like I literally had somebody tell me that at a former employer, like, well, it would be a shame if we didn't finish this because we've already invested so much in it. It's like, well, it would be a shame for us to waste all that more money. But it also takes into account time, right? So if we think of things like relationships, some people, well, we've been friends so long, and it'd be a shame to walk away from them at this point. Or if you think about employers, even like, I've been here so many years, I don't want to walk away now. There are different ways the sunk cost fallacy can affect us. And so why do we do this, right? So a little bit of the psychological context here. First is loss aversion. We start to set the benchmark for value as the price that has been paid, when in reality, what we've paid already is completely irrelevant. Framing effects. So this is kind of another bonus cognitive bias for you. People decide on options based on how they're presented. So if we present this as like a loss, then we don't want to incur that loss. So it depends on how we frame the topic. Over optimistic probability. This is a fun one, another free bias for you. So studies were done at, I think it was a racetrack, where we found that people, well, I didn't find it, the researchers found this, people who had just placed a bet on a horse were actually more optimistic about their chances of success than those who hadn't placed a bet on that particular horse. So we tend to be more confident about our ability to make dividends on an investment after we've spent the money. So that's part of the reason we fall for the sunk cost fallacy here. Personal responsibility. If I'm the one who's made this investment, I feel responsible to not have it end, in a loss. And then again, that all leads to not wanting to appear like we're wasteful. We don't want to admit or look like we're admitting that we've wasted money on something. So I think most commonly we see this in the perpetuation of projects or products that are no longer relevant or no longer providing value. How do we get out of this? I think that's the important question, or how do we avoid it? And really, first thing you need to ask yourself is, had I not already invested something, would I still do it now? Right? It's a very easy question to ask. It's pretty hard to answer, right? It's hard to step out of those emotions. You could also externalize it a bit and say, what would I counsel a friend to do if they were in the same situation? And then finally, if you need to put it on a Post-it note, when you're evaluating spend, look ahead. Don't look back. All that matters is what's ahead. So that's a sunk cost fallacy. Again, I think we're all pretty familiar with that. Next one is another fun one here, authority bias. So this one basically is the tendency to attribute greater accuracy and weight to the opinion of an authority figure. And really fun background on this. And I don't think we have enough time really to get into the story, but maybe you've heard of the Milgram shock experiment. This was a big experiment done by Stanley Milgram around about I think it was the late 1960s, early 1970s, after World War II. And he wanted to answer the question on whether Adolf Eichmann and his accomplices in the Holocaust, for For those unfamiliar, Adolf Eichmann was, I think, like the lead SS agent who was basically responsible for all of the Holocaust and the goings on there. And he wanted to know, can we call them all accomplices, or were they merely following orders? So Milgram said it best, and I'm sorry to just read a direct quote, but that's what I'm going to do. He said, the legal and philosophic aspects of obedience are of enormous import, but they say very little about how most people behave in concrete situations. I set up a simple experiment at Yale University to test how much pain an ordinary citizen would inflict on another person simply because he was ordered to by an experimental scientist. Stark authority was pitted against the subject's strongest moral imperatives against hurting others. And with the subject's ears ringing, and I want to emphasize this, with the screams of the victims, authority won more often than not. The extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of the study, and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. So what went on there? So he set up this experiment where people unknowingly were, well, they knew they were shocking these people. The people they were shocking were part of the experiment. And they were told there were people dressed in lab coats there who were instructing them, you need to shock them. And they would prod them a bit when they were a little hesitant. But at the end of the day, like the range of shocking values on the tool they were using went from like a small 12-volt shock, which isn't too bad, all the way up to 450 volts, which is an extremely painful shock. And in the study, 100% of the participants went up to 300 volts, like all the way up there willingly, just because an authority figure told them to do it. How many do you think went up to the full 450 volts? 66% went to 11, like went all the way just because somebody told them to, which is kind of crazy. So we have this bias where if somebody that we perceive as an authority figure tells us to do something, we will go against our moral beliefs just because they said so. So how do we address this? One, beware of the hippos in uniforms. I think we see this a lot in projects, right? You've got the high hippo, for those unaware, that is the highest paid person's opinion. So sometimes we get in a room and we try to make project decisions, and somebody in there at a management level or senior director level says, I have an idea, let's do it this way. And, you know, we're going to do it because it's their opinion, right? So beware of that. And I have some tips in a sec. We're especially susceptible to people in uniform. So it was important in this study that they had the white lab coats. But we are also more likely to follow the instructions of somebody in a police officer uniform than like a milkman uniform. So how do we avoid this? If you're an authority figure, try to stay out of important decisions. Let the teams decide the best course of action and choose to be informed rather than included. Also, don't wear a lab coat. If you're not in a position of authority, then whenever you are asked to follow something, think with an open mind if you're doing the right thing. Probe with more questions if you're in doubt, and then consider the same recommendation from a person with lower authority, and if you'd follow that. And you can also actively solicit other options for consideration. So if you are a leader, before sharing your opinion, wait for somebody else to share theirs, is one easy way. There are a couple related biases, such as confirmation bias, groupthink, bandwagon effect. So these kind of can play into each other. Like if you picture a room with a bunch of developers, a manager comes in and says, we're going to build it this way. One person grabs onto that because of the authority bias, and now other people start doing it because of groupthink and bandwagon effect. We've just got this whole mash of bias maybe leading us down a not optimal road. Last one here, I see we're right at 1 o'clock here. The Dunn and Kruger effect. This is a fun one. Basically, experts tend to underestimate their knowledge while novices tend to overestimate it. We got this fun chart here. So basically this red line, it would represent somebody's actual performance, where that teal line represents their own perceived performance. So interestingly, to me, just as a one-off, the perceived ability doesn't actually increase that much, right? We're still within that 40 to 60% range where our actual ability kind of far exceeds that. So really, the more we know, And like, why does this happen? I think the more we know, the more we also know we don't know, if that makes sense. And the less we know, the less we don't know, right? So we're living in total ignorance here of what we don't know. But here we're like, oh, there's so much I don't know. A lot of knowing there. That's just a performance chart. So where do we see this? I think we see this a couple places. On the less skilled side, college graduates coming into development teams, people who've come from coding boot camps who think they've got all the answers, people new to agile roles. So, I remember going from being a project manager to a scrum master. The old tricks don't work as a scrum master, or people who've gone from business analysis to product ownership. But excuse me, you go to these classes and you think you suddenly know it all. On the more skilled side, have you ever looked back at work you've done in the past and you get all cringy? Like, oh, did I really do that? That's the Dunn and Kruger effect, right? Because back in the past, you didn't have as much knowledge and you were probably doing the best you could. You probably thought it was great or clever, but now that you're more experienced, you recognize that, but it almost has this effect of reinforcing the imposter syndrome with you, right? How do we counteract this? Try not to mistake the cautiousness of experts as a lack of understanding, number one. And two, don't give too much credence to lay people who like appear confident, but we know only have a superficial knowledge. I'm a big fan of like, know thyself, perform self-assessments, compare them with actual assessments and identify the different gaps. And then I just got a list of some questions to ask yourself to find out where you are potentially on this chart. Are you able to give accurate estimates? Now, I don't love estimates, but are you able to look at a task and within a ballpark know, like, this is going to take me a couple hours or a couple days, and how accurate are you with that? Because that will tell you how much knowledge you truly have about the problem at hand. Are you open to learning new concepts? Are you open to implementing or trying new paradigms? Are you humble? Are you able to take criticism and objectively evaluate feedback? And then, are you a good listener? And remember, I'm smarter than you all. At least that's what I think. So that's a Dunning-Kruger effect. Those are three real quick cognitive biases. Again, there's a couple links there.